Welcome back to another episode of Both Sides Now. We're in Ururoa today with Ururoa Flavell. Kia ora, Ururoa. Great to be with you here.
Kia ora koe. Kia ora kōrua.
Well, we're going to start the interview today with the same question we start every interview with, which is what political ideology or philosophy do you identify with?
Yeah, it's Pro-Maori.
Cool.
Which is not left and it's not right, it's Pro-Maori.
Yeah.
So I often get asked that question. So the thing is, you can get hung up on those sorts of kōrero is, we went into Parliament on the basis of being pro-Maori and bringing that perspective to the political regime at the time. Well, actually, it was about dealing with an injustice by the government of the day. And so we went into Parliament and were swept into Parliament off the back of the belief by our people that we needed an independent political voice that wasn't tied with the bigger machinery of political parties. And we attempted to do that, and probably I think we're still holding to that view even now. So not the left, not the right, but pro-Maori.
Is that a founding philosophy of the Maori Party, that they don't go left or right?
Yeah, no, absolutely no. That's the position, that we're there in Parliament to get the best gains for our people, and if that means sometimes working with others, that's fine, as long as we get the gains, or we say maybe not.
I think that leads quite nicely on to our next question. There's a bit of a sentiment that the Māori Party's decision to go with the John Key-led national government did some damage to the Māori Party reputation. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I think that, well, no doubt in my mind whatsoever, that had we not been in the government, we would not have achieved anything, because that's the nature of politics. Unless you're in the governing party, you don't get anything. So we were there for, 6 years from memory, maybe 9 years. And in that time, we secured a number of huge transformational projects and completed a number of things that I think are enduring. So sure, no doubt we might have been hit by the fact that there was a change of parliament, a change of government at the time, but there's all sorts of dynamic was going on with that. I mean, you got a young, new leader, and as far as I'm aware, our political spectrum goes, every 9 years there's a change of government. We just happened to hit that bump. So you could attribute it to that. You could attribute it to that was the tactic of the Labour Party, because we're obviously adversaries in that time, to sort of taint us with some of the policies of the National Party. But I suppose the proof is in the pudding that in the end we got voted out. So maybe it was there, but I don't think it was just around the tie to the National Party. I think it was all sorts of other factors in that at the time.
So some people are saying at the moment that the Māori Party shouldn't go with National because there's just too much, there's not enough value overlap there. Should the Māori Party be looking equally at every election to go with Labour and National?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if not, you get nothing. You just sit on the sidelines and because that's the nature of opposition, attack. And your role in Parliament as a government is to achieve as much as you can. So why would you not, logic would say, why would you not be there unless there's something that holds you back from maybe one of your core values is a principle here. But other than that, you'd probably want to go there. And in our time, I thought we had the best deal of all. One, all we had to do was support the budget. That made sense simply because we had stable government. Number two, we could vote against the government. We voted against the government more than Labour. And did that stop anything? No, because basically they already had the numbers. Three, no surprises. That's pretty straightforward. Just tell the whip, sorry, we're voting against you. He goes, that's fine. We already got the numbers. Four, we get political gains. That is by policy and implementation. And five, we get budget gains. And then number six, you get to be a minister in particular realms. So Tariana Turia, associate health, associate economic, associate health, associate MSD at the time, associate disabilities or disabilities minister, a minister for whānau ora. I mean, once you got the ministerial portfolio, you're able to make changes and work with the government all the time, even as an associate. So it all stacks up to say logic would tell you that it's okay to be there if you had some sort of agreement like we had. Because you're not tied to the government, you can vote against them every time, but not everybody in the whole wide world listens to votes. They don't. Nobody listens to votes. Maybe those political hard-edged people that just watch it all the time and through the media. But other than that, nobody cares. It's all about the rhetoric afterwards and the media spin afterwards that I suppose, and the political climate at the time, like I say, Jacinda Ardern was coming through. That just changed the dynamic of New Zealand politics. So, you can look back at history, but really, there are all sorts of reasons why things could have been different.
So building off that, what are some of the things that you guys achieved while you were in government for Māori people?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things, well, a heap of things actually, and I can't remember them all. But we did open up, so I'll talk about in the time of Peter Sharples and Tariana Turia from memory, we managed to pull with a national over the line on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That wasn't going to happen. We managed to take off the marine sanctuary at Kermadec Island, which is a property right. We managed to bring a new kaupapa into the whole political environment called whānau ora. We managed to get history in schools. That was an initiative set up by Peter Sharples. We managed to have major gains in the housing space and Māori land reforms, which has been run now by Labour Party, who voted against it. There's a pardon for ruakenana. That was unheard of. There was no way in hell they would have got over the line. There was treaty settlements under Chris Finlayson and Peter and Tariana and myself. We were able to roll treaty settlements through more than any other government in the past. So there's umpteen other things that are on the record that we can say we did by ourselves or with the national government, because in the end we would not have got those things through had it not been working with the government, because you always need numbers. And remembering at the time there was only 2, 3 or 4 of us. So when you think about that, it's pretty significant that you can get stuff through with the government at the time.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this idea of I guess you're in a unique position where you could, because the government, the national government at the time had a majority where you could oppose them. But say in the future there's a coalition, the Māori Party wants to be in Parliament, but acts in coalition with National. Does it get to a point where you feel like your core values have been violated, where we just can't go that way at any point, or do you say we always want to be in government so we can? It's better than nothing. I guess there's a bit of a line there to be drawn.
It's probably a decision for the ones that are in there now. But I mean, if we had a similar arrangement, we know that National didn't need us. They could have run the country with ACT without us. But John Key at the time and Bill English, as the person that followed on, both recognised the value that we brought from just a different perspective, a Māori perspective that sometimes they don't have within their parties. So they were fine with that. They understood that. They said, we don't need you. We can vote, how we like. So the thing is that probably an agreement like what we had at the time would make sense, because you get gains, but you also are not supporting the government agenda because you vote against it. And even if that act was in there, that's National's problem. It's not Māori Party problem. They got to work that out. But for the Māori Party, there might be some gains there that say, righto, we do want to make some gains. For me, it's the ultimate agreement. Why would you not go with it? Where you can vote against the government, you're not tied to them in any way, shape or form, other than the fact that you get gains, political gains, policy gains, financial gains, ability to make decisions at the highest level. You have regular meetings with the Prime Minister of the country and the Deputy Prime Minister and his staff, and you have a direct line to every minister on the table. It's a no-brainer if you really think about it like that. But the downside is, I suspect, that there's sort of too much political baggage with respect to the relationship between the Māori Party and the Labour Party, because we've been in opposition against each other for all of these years since the Māori Party got in. So, and the Māori and Labour Party has a lot of Māori in there anyway. So would they invite the Māori Party to be with them? I think that'll be a tough call, simply because they'd have to tell some of their people who have been in the Labour Party for a while, we might have to stand down. And that wouldn't go down very well at all. Whereas National, well, they got a clear line. But that's my view, and I'm not in there anymore. But I just give you my view for what it's worth.
One of the key policies you mentioned was the marine sanctuary at the Kermadec, which would have been one of the largest marine protected areas in the world. The United Nations has said they'd like to see marine protected areas on 30% of all the ocean around the world, which obviously includes New Zealand. Is that something you believe as well? Generally, should we be looking for more marine protected areas in New Zealand?
No, absolutely. I mean, our people, our whole philosophy is about the protection of the environment. Why would we not support that? The difference with the Kermadec one, was that it impinged on a property right that had been gained through the court, and the Prime Minister, John Key at the time, was going to say, we now claim that, or rather, we set it aside as a marine sanctuary. Well, actually, you're setting Māori property right against a marine sanctuary. Therefore, it's off the table. And we managed to get it off the table. Very tight, but it would have meant at the time that the Māori Party would have had to walk away had we not won that, because it's the same as how we originated from as a property right issue, foreshore and seabed. But it didn't turn out like that, which is, again, the importance of being able to be at the table where you can talk face to face with the Prime Minister at the highest level and say, Prime Minister, property right, not a good look, and we would have to walk. That's a big call. But if you're not there, you can't advocate.
So you bring up obviously the fact that the Māori Party was created through a foreshore and seabed issue with the Labour government. Had the Māori Party not been created, do you think you still would have entered politics anyway, or was this kind of like a sort of a special reason with the creation of the Māori Party?
Oh, no, there's no doubt. I would not have been in politics. It was basically off the back of the hikoi, where a number of us from here were very much involved in dissemination of information about that issue. It was clearly wrong, proven on a number of occasions to be wrong. And so we, as advocates for this notion about speaking for Māori rights and obligations, took that around our area, and I knew Tariana anyway. A number of us were all in the activist movement anyway, and so it just made sense that we would do all we could to stop that legislation, because of the consequences of that being the biggest confiscation of a property right since back in the 1800s. So we had to do that, and following that, of course, she had to cross the floor out of the Labour Party. She says, what shall I call it? I better have a political movement. What shall I call it? Māori Party. Then away we went, and we had the discussions. In fact, the discussions were held here in Rotorua, the first ones. And then the rest of us jumped on board just by way of support, or because we were associated with that protest, namely Peter, Hone Haruera, and myself, the others that joined the party later on. So all of us were in that activist line. Some of us got through, so there's 4 or 5 of us that got through in the first shot. So I probably would not have been in politics. It was more about support for, well, absolutely the Māori Party kaupapa, because the Māori Party kaupapa was what many of us had been espousing over many years of protest, and what successive governments had done.
Do you think the Māori Party kaupapa has changed over time since you were involved in it?
I don't think so. I think the same applies even now, where you'll see our members that are very staunch advocates of wanting the very best for our people. That's not to say we don't want the best for everybody else. It's sort of like of the view that what's best for Māori is, or what's right for Māori is right for the whole country. So we come from that line, and if we can organise projects, come schemes, come plans, come anything else that are right for Māori, they will benefit the country. So that's. I don't think we've changed too much in that sort of line. And what comes with that, of course, is that you can be seen to be way out there, activist, crazy, but at the very heart of the Māori Party is a belief that we want the best for our people.
What would you say to David Seymour's comments that if we wanted true racial equality, we should treat everyone at a policy level equally?
Yeah, I think we do. We should treat everybody equally. The fact is we don't. We know that absolutely, because there's umpteen reports that tell us health statistics, whether it's the justice system, whether it's the police, that there are elements of racism within policies that are developed, which are in practice in New Zealand right now. There's so many reports that can tell you that. So, good idea, but okay, let's make sure when we talk about it that we start from an equal playing field, and we don't, and that we recognise that Māori, according to every statistic you can talk about, tells us that we are not equal in this country. Therefore, nice theory, but actually in reality it's not the same.
I guess the part of the sentiment behind that statement is that we don't need co-governance in New Zealand. Can you explain to us your co-governance philosophy?
Yep, sure. So the treaty principles that most operate by now, government agencies operate against the principles of protection, partnership and participation. Those are the 3 guidelines that the governments have set up, which are all about addressing I suppose, they're the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. So what does protection mean? It means that you protect the rights and obligations provided through the Treaty of Waitangi to Māori. What does participation mean? It means you actually ask Māori to be involved in the decision making. And the last part, partnership, is that you actually work together to achieve the best outcome. That's what it means. So in talking about co-governance, we're talking about allowing Māori to be at the table at equal numbers to make good decisions for all of us, and that you involve us in it, because that was what was promised in the treaty.
Mm. And does equal numbers mean 50-50, or Māori as a percentage of population versus NZ European as a percentage of population?
Well, at the very least it would be by percentage, but we'd say the treaty was about, at the time, signed by so the historical context is that Māori were far and away the majority of the time. History tells us that at the signing of the treaty, there were something like anywhere between 90,000 and 120,000 Māori. There were 2,000 settlers. So the treaty was signed, which basically allowed a space for non-Māori in this country. So we're reversing it now. We're saying, hey, there's a treaty, right? We'll start at 50%, but we might cut it back. But up until the real point is that Māori haven't been at those tables, and if they have been, they've been there at the behest of the government opening the door, no matter which government it is. And they'll say, oh, you can have 1 seat or 2 seats. Well, no, that's not what the treaty was about. So even at 1 seat or 2 seats on a board of 12, we don't even hit the mark. So Parliament is the classic, 120 seats. 7 seats are set aside for Māori. Under any sort of thinking, we're not even close. Mm. So the injustice continues.
In Parliament, so I guess you'd suggest that in Parliament we should have, say Māori are 18% of New Zealand's population, we should have 18% of seats set aside for Māori. Should we also have seats, other diversity quotas in Parliament as well, do you think?
I'm not against that. Mm. What we start from the big picture of, let's talk the treaty straight up. There's the starting point. Then you negotiate. So that's what it was all about. Talk and negotiate, and then you go from there. So it's not about saying, well, we should give, 10% to the Asian community and 5% to the Pacific. No, it's not about that. You start at the first principles. Let's you and I talk about what it might look like. Because it might be that it might end up there, but we actually got to talk first. And nobody makes a decision first before everybody else has a chance to, at firstly, address the issue about the treaty, which is Māori, non-Māori in the first instance.
Since you talk quite a lot about the treaty, there's kind of starting to become a bit of a talk of potentially if New Zealand becomes a republic, what do we do about the treaty? Where do you sort of see the future of the treaty heading in the next 10, 50, 100 years? Do you think we'll keep it as it is, look to rewrite it? Where do you sort of see it heading?
Well, it will always remain an issue until such time as the issues of inequity are addressed. When we can get past that, then it will not be an issue. Why? Because whenever there is an issue of inequity, Māori reach back to that treaty because it's the only place to go to. We haven't got a constitution. We can't go to the international court because you've got to have both parties agree. We've got nowhere to go bar the treaty, which is why that's where we go. So I think if we are able to start addressing some of those issues of the inequities that reign in Aotearoa at the moment, then we're probably always going to be in the state. But there's got to be a loosening of the shackles to allow Māori to have far more participation, far more partnership agreements. And the good thing, though, is, there is a good thing about this, is that the environment is starting to change now. That politics can see. I mean, COVID has told us that actually, if you allow Māori to participate, we can haul people over the line for you. In Ururoa here, it's my view, and being in the building of whānau water right now, had it not been for the efforts of Māori providers in this town, the COVID rates would have been still under the national average. And yet, Māori providers got together, set up the place where all of our vaccinations were done, and we created a Māori environment which everybody enjoyed, and we turned over the numbers of COVID, people to get COVID vaccinations in this town because Māori were involved. But we had to jump up and down, do a haka to get in the door. But when we got in there, everybody said, wow, this is unique. It's amazing, but it's more unique because they finally saw we actually have an added value to bring, just like in politics. Just like in politics, both John Key and Bill English would understand that we have something unique to bring to the political environment of Aotearoa.
Why do you think people are still so surprised at how good a job Māori can do for themselves, or they're so reluctant to allow you guys to have a seat at the table with the 21st century and it's still happening? Why do you think that is?
Well, because we don't engage. And there's still the power structures in place that stop us from doing that. I mean, the politics is a classic example. You've got a power structure that says, hey, you don't need to engage because you've got the power. It's always about power. So if you're the Labour government and you've got power, you have the say about how you go about it. Same with National, So National probably not even engaging with Māori communities at the moment because they just, in my own capacity, I find people don't know where to go, they don't know who to talk to, and they don't know how to approach people to start engaging. That seems to come through. I'm talking about corporate business. I'm talking about people who are supposed to engage with Māori. They're worried that they will do something wrong, or that they'll step on somebody's toes, or they go to the wrong person. So rather than try and work a way around it by getting a Māori to start with, what they do is leave it alone. They don't touch it. And then it's not until you get people like me, consultants who've been around for a while, and they say, "Oh, can you help us?" I say, "Yeah, I can help you, but you got to do some learning with this." I don't ever go with clients that are not prepared to do some learning. I aren't going to stand up in front of any audience of Māori and just say, "Well, here's these guys are the best things in sliced bread." That is not going to happen. So I do a lot of work in behind the scenes with companies, and the same applies politically, that you do some work internally, or else you aren't going to get any results from it.
So what do you say to those people who are too scared to engage with Māori because they're scared to get things wrong? What would you say to them?
Well, take an education process like the ones that I work with. My number is... No, I'm just kidding. I've got enough work. But I suppose that's what I'm saying, is education is the key. Education, this is why what you're doing is pretty good, because you've recognised there's a need for people to get involved in politics. How do you do that? You educate people, you talk to people, you present information. This is the classic example, but we don't do it. We don't do it. We back off, everybody backs off.
I think something Eve and I are both relatively ashamed about as New Zealanders, and I think many New Zealanders are that Māori are represented in statistics in a lot of the wrong ways in New Zealand. Funnily, one of the statistics where Māori are relatively well represented now is in Parliament, where they're a greater percentage in Parliament than a percentage of population, one of the few. It's impossible to put it back to any one issue, do you think? Or what are your views on sort of why we still have this gross inequity in New Zealand?
Because of the political process. If you are in a political movement, you would know, both of you will know, that if the leader says go left, you go left. So they are there at the behest of a political movement, not because of their people. The people vote them there. But our politics is a little bit different from everybody else's. We're very much personality driven. Personalities. We're all about people, how you present yourself, as opposed to other things like the current Prime Minister is very popular. So it's about that sort of that's how our people feel. They don't think about the historical context. A lot of that is gone now. We're very much what's the look of the thing. So while there might be, I don't know, actually I lectured about this, but Māori and National and Labour have not been too different in numbers. 3 or 4 here and there, and then I suppose it's a question of how Māori are they? Because some would say, and there's some politicians been in the National Party said, I'm Māori, but they would never defend a Māori position. They can't, because they're in a National Party that at that time had a particular policy, right? So, same with Labour. We know that because Tariana Turia left the Labour Party on the fact of a political issue, and that all her mates stayed there. So, and they've all, pretty much most of them have said they regret that decision. But politics is, if your leader says go left, as Helen Clark did, or John Key says, well, you do it, or else leave the party. So it's a sort of fallacy to believe that all Māoris are going to be all thinking the same way and all one. Yes, of course we do, but you are restricted by the political environment because, as I say, your movement will tell you how you go. And if you don't like it, you've got to get out.
It's interesting you talk about the idea of like how Māori is someone. So obviously in the National Party we don't have as great a Māori representation at the moment as we would like. But there's also, I think, a criticism that some people would make of some of the people in the National Party. I think Simon Bridges got that criticism a little bit around the fact that how Māori really is. Do you guys sort of differentiate? I don't want to sound naive, but do you differentiate between how Māori people are and how like representing they are of you guys in Parliament? Do you sort of differentiate between them, or is it kind of like all Māori representation is good representation?
Well, yeah, of course it is, but then it comes back down to how effective you are in that political movement. Like, I can say, hand on heart, that I called a meeting of all Māori MPs when I was a minister and said, hey, is there things that we can work together on? Well, of course, there's New Zealand First, there was Greens, there was a National, I can't remember who the National was, the Labour ones, some of them turned up. So straight away we knew, no, this is not going to happen. While we, oh yeah, we've got to go back and talk to Winston. You know, it's not going to happen because you are put there and you can be taken out by your political movement, whoever it is, National Labour, he can take you out. So, and I say that in a nice way, but they can move you on, or else you move yourself on because you can't live with that environment, and that's the challenge. So it's a sort of fallacy to believe that all Māoris think the same, because they don't. And in the political environment, you are restricted by your political flag. That's the facts of it.
So after the 2017 election, did you lose faith in your voter base, or were you, I guess, disheartened by your voter base that, I guess after the result there? What you?
Oh yeah, I'll openly admit I was destroyed. I was destroyed because I thought that we had done so much in our time, and not just me, I'm talking about us as a movement over that period of time with Tariana and Pita, and to take us out, I felt, I was pretty destroyed. I didn't mind admitting it. And I was destroyed for quite a period of time, and I possibly am still destroyed because from time to time I do have huge regrets about what happened that come back to haunt me. But life moves on. So you have to move on, or else it just eat away at you. But yeah, I was disappointed because I thought we had done a lot of work. I thought that that we hadn't disgraced our people in any way. I thought, how is it possible that we've done all this work and people lost faith in us? Because we had a good, strong base, but obviously not enough. And like I say, I think, and taking nothing away from the person that beat me, he beat me. The end of story. And I'd say that there's all sorts of things going on at the same time. But in answer to the question, I was pretty distraught, angry, sad, every emotion you can think of as you do, because I'd been away from my family for 12 years. And that's one thing I think for all politicians that I think that many people forget is the personal sacrifice to families and time that you could have had with your kids. If it's that, and that's just the nature of the beast again. So yeah, it was a tough time, and still probably is, which is why I sort of come right out of it, leave the new ones to come in and go and do what they need to do, and just stay out of the road. But I still support absolutely the Māori Party, because I've always been on that banner from the very start, even prior to the Māori Party, that on the nation, but education of people and wanting the best for our people. And then if you do that right, the rest of the country will benefit.
One of my big gripes is that I was never taught any te reo as a child, which I thought was sort of crazy. And how far do you see te reo being integrated into schools in New Zealand? Primary, intermediate, secondary school, how far should it go?
Well, I think if it's easy enough to do French in other countries and it's easy enough to introduce it here in Aotearoa, then what's the problem? Why should it not be as the only language that you can find in the world right here? It's our language. We've got nowhere else to go to. Therefore, what's wrong with sharing it? And in fact, most of the people, academics as well, would say if you get to learn te reo Māori and understand its culture, you have a totally different perspective on how you present yourself as a person of Aotearoa, because you understand about Māori linked to the land and why any land issue comes up, we get pretty grumpy, because it's about our worldview, about our environmental issues. We get pretty grumpy. Why? Because that's our tie to. But if you understand that, then it's easy to work with, because people will get it. But if you just come at it from a political view, then there's always going to be problems.
Do you have faith that under our sort of, the current sort of European model of education, that we'd actually be able to do it justice and teach it? Or do you think we're something that would need a lot more our system would need to change quite a lot for that to be for Māori history to be properly taught in today, to be taught in schools?
Oh, I think there's a bit of way to go. I mean, just practically, you need some teachers, and you need to upskill teachers, and then you have to spin the whole country. I mean, to put it in perspective, you know, I don't know how many years ago now, 20 years maybe, there was a time when Hene Wehi Mohi sung the national anthem in Māori, and she got berated by pretty much everybody. Certainly anybody that was around rugby, and by government and everybody else, the newspaper, for singing the national anthem in Māori. Now, everybody's hand on here, and e hoa, and away we go. And now we sing it in both languages. I mean, we've evolved as a country from that time. And because I teach this stuff all the time, I know, in my experience, that in our history, there have been things that we should all be ashamed of. And in terms of, in particular, around the treatment of Māori, and that's why we have the Waitangi Tribunal to try and sort some of that stuff. But we've made some gains. Some are realists. We've got to look to the future, and teaching our young people Māori and culture is going to be good for us into the future. I mean, you can see it now in the universities where our young ones are far more, you know, your guys' age, far more accommodating and understanding because they've had a little bit of, maybe not to the extent you're talking about, but you know, they've had something as a start, and so they're willing to. They got listening ears too. Whereas another generation, they weren't listening. It was nah, it ain't going to work, and that's a historical context that we've got to deal with.
So did you bring up the Waitangi Tribunal? So I've looked at the Waitangi Tribunal a little bit through like the perspective of law, and there's kind of a bit of a criticism that was kind of just a way of kind of pushing Māori to one side and sort of giving them a place to air their grievances. Do you guys feel that you actually achieve things with the Waitangi Tribunal, or do you sort of think it's just still kind of, it's just a place for you to air your grievances and then the government just kind of move on?
Well, that process has evolved as well, because there was a time that you couldn't go back past a certain period, and then right now that the government does not have to do anything with any Waitangi Tribunal outcome. So what does that tell us? Right? So it tells us, okay, nice sounding board, but that's about it. Some governments do take up, and then you move into the settlement process. It says you negotiate. But the settlement process is itself flawed because it offers up no more than 2% of the value of the loss. So whichever way you look at it, Māori lose. And yet it's supposed to be the sort of halfway house. It's not. All it is a sounding board for people. Well, why are people like the Waitangi Tribunal? Is because we're able to put history in writing. We can put our statements there and it's recorded as history, which, you know, wasn't available to many people. So when people put their tribes put their own history in writing, they have it forever because it's been documented, which is the benefit. But does it give you justice? No.
It's interesting, when we talked to Matiria today, she said that when they passed the treaty settlements every time in Parliament, that she really struggled with that. Was that something you also struggled with as well, the passing of treaty settlements?
Oh yeah. I mean, the title on all of those settlements is this is full and final. Our Māori Party was full and final for now. Come back in another, send your kids back. Send your kids back. 2% can't be real, because the justification of the original settlement process was the fiscal envelope, which was $1 billion, settle all grievances. Well, come on.
Yeah.
2%. And that, unfortunately, despite protest, is still the current policy, because it was framed up at the time that certain tribes would get, there's a ratchet clause in there. You can take that term either way you like. But there's a term in there that says that certain tribes would benefit if it went over that cap. Well, it's gone over that cap. So some benefited, some didn't. Some, like Whakatohe, have been in the process for 20, 30 years because they got told, oh, you didn't play the game, back of the line. So, I mean, sorry to be so down on it.
No, I think there's a lot of learning, I think, as well.
Yeah, do you think, when is it realistic? We'll have these social inequities with Māori and NZ European for a while, but separate to that, the historical reconciliation, will we get to a point where we don't have to think about that in the future?
Possibly. I mean, firstly, to apologise, that's sort of quite good, and acknowledge something went down, because that wasn't the case. Number two, that you think about compensation or reparation, that's good too, because it helps at least tribes get something going for themselves. And many tribes are doing well off the back of that money that they've received through settlements. But 3, then they're still changing the culture of New Zealand society to go with all of that. Because we still, ultimately, these things around settlements and treaty are all about relationships between Māori and non-Māori. So we've still got a lot of talking to do, a lot of work to do. And like I say, the good thing is that I'm just noticing now that when we start talking about co-governance, everybody gets a little bit, some people get scared of it, but actually, when we do it, it works. Everybody gets on because they want the best outcome. So we work hand in hand in the best interest of the whole community, not just Māori. But the difference with Māori being involved in the co-governance is that we bring a different worldview to it. That's the difference.
So when you talk about different iwi, so Ngāi Tahu have done very well out of the treaty settlements, and they have got a big strong business going in the South Island. Then you've got an iwi like Ngāpuhi up north, which haven't even had their settlement yet. How come some have managed to settle and some haven't?
Oh, there's all sorts of reasons for that. I mean, you got the historical context that Ngāi Tahu was first out of the gates. But they set the scene. They provided the template, really, and chose to go when Māoridom said no. They decided at that time, this is this one shot we got, therefore we're going to go. For their best interest, they did what they needed to do. Ngāpuhi, on the other hand, is a different dynamic. You got umpteen tribes that are all coming under the settlement. And actually, it's the process. Because the process says you have to be, I can't remember the term, but you have to have mandated groups and you have to be in collectives and here are the rules, this is how it goes. And yet, what happened back then was that Ngāi Tahu is structurally different from Ngāpuhi. And at that time they chose to go. Ngāpuhi weren't ready at the time, as were many other tribes. So it's been a long process for everybody to actually get lined up. But the Crown created the process. And as a result, even though you're getting some money out of it, many tribes have actually splintered because they've been put against each other because of the process design, supposedly for ease of getting through the settlement process, but actually it's created more problems, and which meant that you have to toss it back, start again, or tribes are split, or you get to the back of the line, or all sorts of other things happen. So again, the Crown process, most people, Māori, will tell you it sucks because it tells you it determines for you this is how it will be, and you can't change it. So you got to fit the model.
Should we lower the threshold for MMP? The Māori Party's historically been sort of just on the lower end and hasn't been able to get as many seats. Is that something you'd support?
Oh yeah, well, anything to get more seats, obviously, for Māori in the door. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but again, the history is that actually once upon a time, when the first Parliament was set up, Māori we weren't able to vote. We weren't able to vote because we were over 21, we were male, but we had collective land titles, so therefore we couldn't vote. So now we still have some of these issues, by the way, in Rotorua here, where we've got a local body law that would allow for fair representation. I think it goes 3, 4, 5, and Māori would get 4, something like that. So that was the good model for Rotorua, based on the fact that this town was started off the back of a gift by Māori for land in this town. But it gets to the government, and the government says, "Oh no, we can't pass this bill as a local bill because it's unique. They can't pass it because it doesn't show that it's unfair." Well, when you dig down to it, we find that actually there are precedents throughout the country where boards, councils have been able to go way outside their threshold. It's supposed to be 10%. There are records of that, some going up to 70% differential, and nobody says a thing. I mean, we'd be saying that's straight out and out racist. And this is the Attorney General says, no, it's this law that you're bringing in to try and have equality is not fair. It impinges. It's not free from discrimination. Give me a break. But so what I'm going about is to say throughout the political time that at every point Māori have been discriminated against. It hasn't been fair. So when as I say, Māori couldn't vote for the first Parliament, when we did get the balance of vote, the laws changed. We're now given 4. We had 4 seats from about 1863, I think it is, through to 1996. That's a long time to have 4 seats in a parliament of 100 and something, 120.
You talk about a lot about injustices. As a law student, something we're told quite a lot about is that Māori are highly overrepresented in the prison population and all the justice statistics. Why do you think that is? Do you think our police are racist in New Zealand?
You don't need me to tell you that. I mean, I have high respect for the police. I've been out and seen what they do. But report after report would tell you, yeah, there's an element of that. And you probably get that in, if that's the case in the police, you probably get it in a Ministry of Social Development, Oranga Tamariki, and the courts. There's umpteen reports that tell you that, not me. So that's how it is.
What's your vision for the future of the Māori Party? In a decade, where would you like to see the Māori Party?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think this, in experience of it's taken us 12 years to get to this point in time, it's probably going to be the same, maybe a few more seats, and the political environment will say we'll come in and then we'll fall away, and we'll come in and fall away. And it will be very much determined, I suppose, on what happens on the bigger picture, because so many things are impacting on the political environment now, you know, world affairs, even more than ever now. Recessions are on our, you know, we're in it. Wars. So there's a different dynamic from what was when we were back in, 15, 20 years ago now in Parliament. So it's probably going to change again. But I am adamant, and I'm hopeful that Māori will continue to have the representation that is truly Māori. Because the one thing I always remember about the Māori Party is that we could be free to be Māori without being inhibited in any way. We could say what we wanted to say, as opposed to having been caught within the political machines of both National and Labour, where you are limited in what you can say because they put you there. So that's my hope, is that we maintain that sort of line.
The military in New Zealand has, possibly over the last decade, hasn't been as politicised as some other issues. Well, obviously, we've got a big war going on in Ukraine at the moment. Were there perspectives you or the Māori Party had on foreign policy, like nuclear disarmament, that you really felt or weren't able to push as much as you did?
Not really, but we did worry because the military has a lot of Māori in them. And we felt sometimes that sending them over to and being involved in a war that was not necessarily our war was not the best thing. Sure, give support to people. I think we supported that notion by whatever logistics, medical, food, etc. Support other peoples with that, because that's our nature. Manaki, look after other people. But to put our people on the front line in terms of being in the military as soldiers, and even in SAS, the numbers of Māori in those units is quite high, from what I understand. So putting them into the war zone was something that we didn't support, albeit they probably wanted to go and be there, because that's why they're in the army, for goodness sake. But we didn't sort of enter too much into that sort of foreign game. It was very much centred more around being at home here, on the view that if we can't get our own house in order, we no use telling about anybody else to what to do. So far better that we organise ourselves first.
You were talking before about the future of the Māori Party. Obviously, at the moment, if I'm correct, Labour hold 5 out of the 7 Māori seats. Do you think that the Māori Party does a better job of representing Māori interests than the Labour Party do, despite having such a large Māori caucus?
Well, the proof will be in the pudding at the next election. So they've actually got 6 of the 7 seats. Now, the only one they have not got is the Wairiki seat, this one here. And our people held on to that and brought our person back, Rawiri, into after I moved out for 3 years. So I think that he'll stick around. I think there's still a belief in what he does, and not only him, but Debbie Ngārewa Peka, because they are true blue, able to express freely the issues that our people want to talk about. If you are stuck as a Māori in the Labour Party and you're the government, well, you're defending your policy. And you'll never ever get enough. Just like us, when we're in government, you're never ever going to get enough. But you do your best, and that's all you can do. But I've forgotten the question now, but it was a good one.
Do you think Labour will be able to represent Māori better than the Māori Party? Who do you think better represents?
No, I don't think they can. They're nice, nothing against them. Right? They're nice enough people. But they are tied to the machine. Whereas, and you can see that in the speeches, that our ones will defend staunchly our constituency. Well, if you're the government of the day, you will fight that rhetoric back, and you'll deny it. Why? Because you're the government. It's pretty hard, that's the nature of politics.
So you say those, the Māori Labour MPs, they've got to defend all Labour's policies. For me, it does feel sort of strange that even though New Zealand have got sort of massive diversity of ideas, they're mostly just represented in two big policy manifestos. How do you sort of disagree with people in your party and bring those different ideas to fruition? Should people within the Labour Party be able to sort of publicly disagree to get a sort of, greater diversity of ideas?
Well, I suppose that's their business, but in terms of the Māori Party, that's what we always did, was talk. And I can say pretty much most of the time, hand on heart, that we were all aligned about our view. And if we weren't, we just spent a lot of time talking, working it through to make sure that we were aligned. And the thing is that we have a set of values, core values that we use to judge where we should sit on particular issues. And that guided us. So we were easily able to lead in that regard, following kaupapa Māori values. If it fitted with that structure, could. If it didn't, well, we wouldn't vote for it.
Do you think there will ever come a time in New Zealand where Māori are not the same as European, but the statistics are much the same in health and education, where Māori people do as well in New Zealand as European people do? I
certainly hope so. That's the goal. And I certainly hope that non-Māori have statistics that Māori have. That would not be good for the country. So the hope is that we work together on things that allow us to get to the same place and have equal opportunity for everybody, and equal outcomes. Māori people want to live a good life. They don't want to be confined to the doom, gloom sort of scenario. But sometimes there's things that get in the road. I can say that if we took the model of, say, how you rehabilitate Māori prisoners, right, in prison, it's usually by taking them back to their own culture. Most of the statistics, when you've got negative statistics coming up, are talking about you must teach these people about who they are. And that relies on the education system or re-educating people as well. So there's a lot to be said for Māori learning our own language, as well as the rest of the country. That would set us up, I think, in a far better way. Because the reverse is that if a person doesn't have a knowledge of their culture, then it puts them at risk. And indeed, one of our kaumata that we talked about says, if you don't have your language and culture, it's like not having one limb. That's a big call.
So the Māori Party has been very focused on Māori issues. Was there ever a point where you felt like you weren't able to put as much effort into other really important issues like, for example, climate change or long-term health outcomes for the rest of New Zealand?
We'd say they're all Māori issues. Climate change, health, they're all Māori issues. So we did put every effort into every one of those parts. There's not one sort of thing that wasn't a priority, but again, we're a small party. I had one chief of staff, we had about 2 researchers, and they were part-time. One, very small teams, and you got to cover this amount of material. Luckily, as a minister, you got a whole department that can do some of that work, but not at the political level, like it's in the party level. You've got to have your own researchers to provide a position on a particular issue, whatever it might be. So we had many people who volunteer their services to give us advice. But in the National Party and the Labour Party, you got rooms full of people who are sitting in behind you who can tell you this is where we sit, and you all probably agree. We had 3. Same with funding of political movements. Labour got a fair bit of money, I think, from unions, and National got a fair bit of money from private business and so on. Māori Party will take donations. That's the difference.
I've been in my law degree. They've just started introducing tikanga into law, so principles of tikanga. Do you think there'll be a day when we sort of see tikanga and the common law working together?
I hope so, because there are things in our culture that clearly must be all right for New Zealand, because so many businesses are now taking up our values and wanting to practice things that actually change the whole environment about how they work. I mean, a recent example where I had a Māori group was working with, a non-Māori group was working, trying to get an engagement with a Māori group. We were able to facilitate bringing them together. We did it in a Māori way. We had food, we had mihi mihi, we had introductions, we had whakawhanaungatanga, introduce yourself, we had hongi, and then we had a signing of the agreement, then we had karakia, and those people, non-Māori, came away from that saying, wow, it was so simple yet so effective because it impacted on not just them as people, but it impacted on their hearts. They understood that new dynamic which might have taken place in a boardroom like this, but actually it was just the tikanga that we used to facilitate that process that changed the whole environment when these two groups have been at war for 2 years.
Is that something that's left you relatively optimistic, seeing how receptive business have been to opening their minds up to Māori practice?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's why I still pick up 1 or 2 clients here and there. But I'm really pleased around the move for people to start opening their eyes and hearts up and their minds up to things Māori. And as long as they do it with some honesty and integrity, then people will reciprocate. If they're just there for a tick box exercise to get through a cultural audit or something like that, then you're not going to win it. People are not going to win it. They're not going to come with you. So I am pleasantly surprised by the sort of momentum being gained through that. And sometimes it's been forced, like the discussion around co-governance is forcing us to have that discussion now, which is good. Sure, it's going to be a bit rocky until such time as people get used to it, but it's changing the environment, which is really good, and the debate. Got to have a quarter.
Do you think there is still much of that tokenistic element that goes on, that people are just doing that tick box exercise, we're going to engage with Māori here just to tick it off and then carry on? Do you think there's much of that tokenistic stuff that still goes on?
I think there's still some of that there, and we saw that through COVID, where people are still unwilling to give up power, and all of a sudden they say, well, can you help us now? So we help. Or can you take it over now? I know that to be the truth because I've seen it so many times. So I think there's still that tokenistic effort, but I think the times are changing. I refused at one point some 20 years ago to work with non-Māori because I just didn't see the point. It was too hard. The country wasn't ready for discussions around a flag, Tino Rangatiratanga flag, around the treaty. That's in our history, we know that. So when we had marches, people tried to run you off the road. What's happened now? Not too many protests. Like in terms of Māori, sure, about COVID and vaccine and stuff like that. But you know, in terms of race relations, it's pretty quiet, really, considering. And it's been like that for probably 10 years or so now. So the climate is changing for the good, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
You mentioned the flag. One of the arguments, I suppose, was the potentially when they look to change the flag was that removing the Union Jack potentially would be beneficial for Māori because it's a symbol of colonialism. Do you support that? Do you support a change in the flag? Or do you even view the flag as being a symbol of colonialism?
Well, what I know about flags is that they are to the heart. So you see your flag, going down the street, you think, oh, wow, that's me. That's why when the Tino Rangatiratanga flag came around, it engendered such anger that nobody liked it. They thought it was all the crazies and the activists and the radicals and those people who did not want one New Zealand. Well, times have changed now, and it changed off the back of a political decision by John Key to say, Peter Sharples, your request to allow us to have the Tino Rangatiratanga flag off the harbour bridges is a fair call. It's okay. Next week, after Waitangi Week, nobody's going to care. Just carry on. Now it's pretty much on, the council buildings and so on. So we move with the times and adjust with the people that are brave enough to put things in front of the country. So in terms of the flag, Australia flies 2 flags, the Indigenous flag plus the Australian flag. Why can't we not do that here in Aotearoa and take that over to wherever we go, travel, and don't be scared of it, because I suppose at that time it was challenging New Zealand tanga. Now we're talking about building Aotearoa tanga, and that's the good thing.
You talk about political or political bravery. Do you think it's the role of the politician to to put into practice the policies which the people that have elected their constituents have decided upon, or is it the result of the goal of the politician once they're elected to enact the policies that they personally believe in?
Oh, well, I mean, that's going to be really that the reality is that you enact policies of your party. So that's why you believe in Labour and you believe in National. You got to implement those policies. You get very little room to bring in your own agenda. Sometimes you can. If you've been around a political movement for some time and done all of the work, you can win it. Or else you got a bright idea and you get your private members bill pulled from the hat. In which case you can advance it, but again, only if you can win your colleagues or win over the opposition. And 9 times out of 10, you aren't going to win even though they might believe in it, you will not win over the opposition because that's not a good idea in politics. And then still you got to win your mates over, you know. I mean, people like Lewis Wall found that out. So that's just politics.
And to finish, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing New Zealand? Can you pin it on one issue?
Oh, that's a hard one because right here and right now, the issue is, of course, just allowing people to be able to live a good life under the conditions that we have right now with the cost of living and petrol and food and COVID. It just seems like it's all dumped on us in this last year or so, last 2 years. So many people find it hard. You know, this town here, there's umpteen motels are full of people who just do not have a home, for goodness sake. So we've got some serious issues to do with that. But the hope is that we can pull through against all these challenges that we've got by working together. And that means Māori with non-Māori and with other people who come to this place that they now call home.
Cool. Kia ora te rā. That was awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
It's bye. Nice to talk to you both.
Awesome.
Cool.